July 8th, 2020 Buildings and Grounds Committee meeting to order. The time is 3:40, and I will ask all present to state your name. I am Serge Ruffolo. I will point to you.
Tim Keeley.
Gary Dirk.
And John Langton, Superintendent.
Jeremiah Lang.
All right, with that being said, I will pass the meeting on over to Mr. Keeley. All yours.
Thank you, Mr. Ruffolo. So we've gathered here today to have a discussion about the particular scope of the 2021 work that involves the library at Army Trail, as well as the library at Lake Park Elementary Schools, and then also have a bit of a broader discussion about long-term plans for libraries, including the space that we're sitting in. So I thought it would be prudent to start the conversation with Mr. Roble providing kind of a high level, but more detailed overview than this team has seen in terms of what the plan is for the 2021 work at those two elementary libraries I mentioned. Give Mr. Langton a chance to interject with some of his vision type thoughts, and then just have an open dialogue with the committee about how we're going to allocate our resources to accomplish these tasks. Certainly with the recent COVID outbreak and the potential significant reduction in our revenue, we're seeing the possibility of a reduction in the scope that we're going to be able to do, and maybe the length of time that we do with our capital projects moving forward. So we felt, given the importance of the space that we're sitting in right now and the potential significant costs involved, we wanted to have the opportunity for the committee, superintendent, the architect to have that discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to Rob Roble right now, and he's going to walk through his interpretation of our intent for the 21 library spaces.
Thank you, Mr. Keeley. So our intent, so we are in the design development phase of doing the drawings and specifications for the 2021 project. So we've got conceptual plans for the libraries. We've had one focus group meeting to talk about the purpose of libraries in the district. This is a follow-up meeting to that, but in the meantime, we've been developing ideas, and we have hard copies of the plans for both the library at Lake Park School and at Army Trail School. So one of the things that we started talking about immediately with staff and the administration was, as we look at these first two libraries, what are the overarching global concepts that need to be applied to all the libraries in the district? Meaning, if there is a long-term goal to renovate all 7 libraries, what are those features and amenities that we should be incorporating in all 7, and then starting with the first 2? And we know that long-term, when Indian Trail gets done, because it's a different grade level, it's a larger library, as a middle school, junior high, it's going to have different needs. So that library will evolve differently than the elementary schools. But we felt that there should be some continuity in the organization of the libraries at the elementary schools in terms of the different zones of the library, the features, the size of the collection. Are there maker spaces or hands-on workstations? Is there movable furniture? To what extent? And what's been very interesting from the start is with our Lake Park and Army Trail, just the geometry of the 2 rooms is vastly different. However, we've been able to work hard, and Tyler's been spending a lot of time trying to develop concepts and layouts so there is parity between the 2. So when I talk about that, they both have circulation desks. They both have areas where there's a traditional book stacks, because there's a collection in both. There's area for a traditional reading room where there's flexible tables and chairs that the students or the staff, the teachers, can rearrange in either a lecture format or a more traditional reading room format, not unlike what we're in now. We talked with the administration and staff, or the principals, about makerspace and some hands-on space. So we provided some areas where there could be countertops and storage for 3D printers and Lego walls and manipulatives and robots and things like that. So it's those types of ideas that we're trying to incorporate into the spaces. And I think we've had some success so far. So If you want to look at those plans, we can certainly, I can have Tyler walk them through you in greater detail. It means everybody kind of standing up and walking over and looking at the drawings, if that's appropriate. Or
so if I could interject, and I appreciate Rob's concise review of really what led us to this point. I also want to thank Mr. Ruffolo for bringing up the really important question to ask is, in the long term, what can we accomplish with the resources that we have available? What we also know is that the room that we're sitting in right now, which is the Indian Trail Junior High Library, serves 100% of our students in this community, whereas each of our separate elementary school libraries serve just that local school community. And so I think the question that I would ask, and to answer Rob's question, I do think that our committee members should take a look at the conceptual drawings that Leggett came up with for the 2 spaces that he spoke of, because that's where we had anticipated we should start. However, with the recent conditions and the potential implication, as Mr. Keeley described, the financial implications in the long term, we should make sure that we make decisions in a priority order so that we don't get caught having 2 schools with brand new, fresh, fantastic libraries, and then our other elementary schools we can't afford to do. Similarly, we certainly don't want to abandon the ability to do this space here at Indian Trail because it serves all of our students. So again, thank you for Mr. Ruffolo for bringing that up, because I think it's a really important and even timely topic that we need to discuss right now, because we don't want to move forward with planning for projects that are not the highest priority. So with that, I'm going to suggest, as Rob did, to have Tyler just kind of walk through the committee with the committee members, the drawings that we have on that separate table. We're going to pause the meeting for the recording so that we can do that, just so we don't confuse the audience that may be listening. And then we'll join back up once we take a look at those drawings, and maybe even our board members can comment on those drawings. Okay, thank you.
99% complete with all the drawings and specifications by the second week of September. So I was just counting weeks on the calendar. It's about 8 weeks away. And that will be a challenge because frankly, we don't know what your vision for this space is. And what makes it a lot more challenging than the other two libraries we just talked about is it's a 2-story space. Some of the spaces on the second floor are not the extent of
current situation as far as in the world. Building a second level in this library is probably not going to happen for a long time. 2 years ago, it was something that we thought was maybe possible. And then even a year ago, I thought, well, maybe you can do some kind of a loft thing. I don't know. I'm just being crazy Serge, but now we have to be even more realistic, knowing that kind of I don't. The people here at Indian Trail and what they would envision something like that and how it would work here. I still think that's probably what would suit the kids better than what we currently have. And that's just me. Now, you guys can chime in. And I'm talking everybody, our administrators, our board members, and even Leggett. But I'm not saying halfway. I'm just saying
all of our professional service providers perform when they're not given enough time. You leave a lot unknown, your bid documents aren't complete, and then things are found along the way and your budget isn't nearly as tight as it could be. So I have serious concerns about thinking about a 2021 edition of this library. Now, I think we're in a perfect position to have this conversation for this space for 20.
Army Trail and Lake Park in 2021 and do Indian Trail in 2022, possibly 2023, sorry, all the other schools, but you may not get your new libraries or learning spaces or whatever else. And I'm just going on record saying it's not that we want to slight you. It's just the current, economic situation. We
I think that, in 2 years, we're going to have a much better sense of our financial situation. Right now, we're just guessing based on a really low CPI. So, and I would leave it to the superintendent to make a comment as well, but I think that that's an option that we have to be willing to consider as well.
So here's another thought. I also heard what Rob said last. Gives us ample time. Let's push that one off. And if we want to accomplish something more significant next summer than just doing Lake Park's library, I think it would be pretty easy to replicate that for the Lincoln Library. And then we've gotten 2 of the libraries with a new standard for what expectations in elementary libraries would be with a more reasonable cost structure. Because the Wesley Library shifted it to just Lake Park and possibly Lincoln. And Rob, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I'm just looking at the floor plans, and they're not identical, but they're close. So there's a tremendous amount of similarities. There's just some of the adjacent spaces, bathrooms instead of corridors, and a little bit of a courtyard. But I think there's definitely logic to what you're suggesting. And there is a lot of work on our end for Army Trail just because we're moving the location. So we're doing demolition in 2 areas, building a library, restoring the other 2 classrooms. So the workflow, the cost would definitely be less with your suggestion. So I think there's some merits to it.
One thing I'll say is, would we then at least start the ball rolling on Indian Trail, or are we jumping the gun? Because we really, obviously, we do want to make the space special. It does impact every one of our students, and before they leave to go to high school, and I think that's 5th, 6th, or 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. This is an important time. So, would we start the ball rolling on this while Lake Park and Lincoln are being, I guess, sharpening pencils and all that other stuff.
Are you referring to the planning and development of that?
Yes, since we need a lot of time, I mean, would we be able to at least get an idea and start kicking around ideas? Because then we can at least say, all right, we know in 2020 we're ready to go, and we know budget-wise it's going to cost X amount because we're going to need to make those decisions. And I really think we need to jump on it and have that locked in as that's 2022. But who knows what the future brings us surprise-wise. Hopefully not what we've been through here in 2020. So I know we don't want to say, well, we can always start, our library here at Indian Trail and school can start, but we can keep working. It's too distracting. I get it. So I understand if we need the time to plan, well, then now I'm saying, fine, let's do the other projects. I'm fine with Lincoln and Lake Park. I think those schools, it would definitely benefit all our schools, but knowing those spaces, it'd be, I think dollars and cents, it works out. But I still think we really have to look at this space and make it what it needs to be.
So is it purely a budgetary reasoning for not proceeding with Army Trail? Because we've already done this preliminary work, so we're kind of where we need to be to start Army Trail in 2021, right?
Yeah, Army Trail right now is about $900,000 conservatively is what we're looking at, and I just believe that we're giving the committee the opportunity to have a conversation because up to this point we haven't had clear and open dialogue about the library that we're sitting in here at Indian Trail. Since my tenure began, we've known that it's something that we're going to look at. Mr. Langton and I have talked about it, but it's always this big white whale just because of the expense. But knowing the significant impact it's going to have on such a large section of our students, the committee's, you're starting to make it clear to the administration and the architect that it needs to be on the near horizon and always just being a hill that we're not ever going to be able to climb. So I think that the reason that Mr. Langton brought up Army Trail as a potential punt to the future is because it is several $100,000 more than Lake Park, and that's just preliminarily at the SD phase. Could be more once they really start getting into things. But that's strictly the reason. It's just the complexity of it. And again, the reason I even brought up the idea of foregoing both libraries is the notion of the importance of getting the library done here. We could very well end up, doing that library in 2022, this library here in 2022, to the level that we would like, to the level that we know would get us 20, 30 years down the road. And then at that point, the economy is in a place where we can say, okay, now we can really look at these elementary ones and follow through. I think what Mr. Ruffolo said earlier is poignant because it is important to the Board of Education, the administration, and the community that, if we're making these renovations to one or two of the elementary schools, that, there needs to be a plan to extend that across not only for the sake of equity for our students, but for our staff as well, so that everyone has the same opportunities.
Good. Thank you.
So my question of the committee members, Mr. Williams, Mr. Ruffolo, and Mr. Lang, is your preference that we shift the scope or ask Leggett to look at shifting the scope for next summer's library projects to abandon, or Mr. Keeley's phrase, to punt Army Trail and replace it with Lincoln? Or the other option is to abandon both and focus those dollars and the time and resource to developing Indian Trails Library for summer 2022.
Well, I heard Rob very clear, and everyone else, Dave's points being clear too. We want to do it right, and we know that. But my sentiment is let's get the ball rolling. So I think doing the Lincoln and Lake Park libraries makes sense. The dollars that would have been spent at Army Trail will be delayed until Indian Trail is addressed. And then we're not punting, we're just taking a time out on Army Trail, and it may, hopefully it's back to the front of the line in 2023. So I think that would benefit the kids of our district and the community, and I'm fine with doing this Lincoln Lake Park, because like you said, they are similar footprint. I think dollars would be something that, putting aside what we might need here at Indian Trail, but yet being able to touch 2 libraries. So I'm fine with that. We still won't know until probably sometime next year where 2022 money, what it's going to be, but I'm fine with that. I don't know.
I think the other, if just your comment about adding structure potentially, we had those challenges in the boardroom wing, and we heard from ICI and Terry Fielden that, he had concerns about the duration of construction. We may have that same problem here, where the 8 weeks of summer may not be enough time to finish this space. So even the logistical planning of moving the library out, relocating it temporarily so that work can start potentially early or go late. I mean, even just the logistics of that will need some time and effort. So I think that needs to be, factored into the equation, is how the construction physically happens.
Well, that's my point too. It's not like a classroom or classrooms, though the library is an important part of this, building and the day-to-day activities. Whether we start early clearing out the library, which we've done here, and we didn't plan on it, but we did for 2020. That may be part of the planning. That's why I'm saying we should jump on it pretty quickly, because maybe next year is, I guess next year during the whole planning, we cut short the use of the library in the spring, so we can start getting somebody in here to start doing things to get it ready for 2022. I'm fine with that. Are you guys fine with that? And John, obviously you would have to talk with the administrators here and say, how could we do it? Jeremiah, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm interested in John's opinion on, where is the greatest need amongst the schools.
I think the greatest need, if we only had one bucket, would be Indian Trail, because it serves 100% of our students. Having said that, we have 7 elementary schools that need to properly support the learning of our kids there too. So I think in the long term, even if it's in the next 4 to 5 years, we absolutely need to make a commitment to doing all of the elementary school libraries. To make this modification for next summer, I think is a wise move, because it is going to allow us to put in the books that 2022, we're doing the Indian Trail Library, and we'll give Leggett an opportunity to get started on that project so that we can make sure it's done correctly and within the time frame and budget that we allocate. Everything is a priority, but as Mr. Ruffolo pointed out last month, all of our students go through Indian Trail, 100% of them. So I do not want us to miss the boat with not being able to do this space. And I am worried about that. I'm glad he brought that up, because I think that's a legitimate and very strong possible concern. So I feel, even the financial side of it, I feel that if we make the commitment for 2022 for Indian Trail, and we slightly scale back next summer's project, knowing what we know today, I feel that we can afford to do that. as long as we're reasonable with what the vision ends up being for this Indian Trail space. And, you know, there's all sorts of pie in the sky things, from skylights to second floors. And, but when we go through that investigation and development phase with Leggett, they're just going to need to understand and have a sense for what the long-term costs might be. So they need permission to be able to say, whoa, 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 no, if you do that, you're going to blow your budget right out of the gate. And we have to respect that. So Mr. Williams is right. We have to do it correctly. We don't want to do it in a shoddy way, but we also have to realize that there's a limitation on how much money we can spend.
I get it. Yeah.
So
sounds like a good plan.
My sense from this discussion is that we're giving Leggett direction to move forward with delaying or putting off Army Trail, adding Lincoln's library, and inking in the books that we need to move full forward for 2022 for Indian Trails Library.
That's my preference.
Okay.
You are correct, sir.
Okay, and we have a deadline of July 24th to get drawings and documents to ICI so they can do their next cost estimate to get to the board in August. So we will redirect in a hurry and let them, no, it's okay. The beauty is that the spaces are very similar. So I think we can make that change relatively quickly. We'll have to do some quick field work to make sure there's no surprises at Lincoln. I think we can pull it off. So at least in terms of getting to this next milestone that we have in 2 weeks. So
thank you for that, Rob.
I guess moving right along, I do have a question, and I brought it up in our weekly board updates. I'm sorry, Buildings and Grounds Committee update. It was something that was discussed about sending cameras through water pipes here at Indian Trail. So did we find out, like, what's the deal? I mean, I know I got a response from Mr. Dirk on Monday, but I'm not real sure what happened. Why are we getting water in our new areas, and what caused it? Is it this new water line that we're putting in, and how much is this going to cost us?
Sure. Thank you. Mr. Dirk is on the meeting call, so I'm going to turn it over to him.
Hi. So yes, we had all the lines scoped to the camera. They flushed the lines, every interior line with a green dye, and traced it to every outlet, outside, all the way through the commons, through the boardroom, out across the street at Army Trail, into Village Hall parking lot. They checked all the
I'm sorry, I'm not Mr. Dirk. If you could maybe just back up to kind of how we got here. Talk a little bit about a couple of events earlier this summer, just to give context to the board members.
Sure, sorry about that. So a few weeks ago, when we had the real heavy rains, the first one we had, I think it was like almost 3 inches in a half an hour, we had water coming up into the boardroom hallway. After discussions with Mr. Langton and John Larkin and others that have been in the district forever. So we've never had water there. Well, we found out that going off the prints, the prints that they were provided, they actually tied the new sanitary lines into the storm line. They mistakenly put it into the storm line. So we had the heavy rain, any new plumbing fixture that was installed for like the fax lab, bathrooms, water backed up into those spaces. So they retrenched the floor, disconnected the pipe they had just put in, reconnected to the storm drain. And at that point, we had removed the plug inside the commons to allow pressure to come up in the commons and not flood the boardroom hallway. As we had floor tile going in, we had drywall in that space, and we didn't want to flood that space again. So after the second heavy rain, we had no water whatsoever in the boardroom hallway, any of those spaces, classrooms, fax lab, boardroom. However, we did have about 1.5 inches of water in the commons, 2 straight rains, several days apart from each other. So the lines being scoped went from roof drains and cleanouts through the commons, through the boardroom hallway. They scoped all the way outside, like I said, with green dye, and followed them to the outside structures. We have one structure on the west side of the building where the outlet and the inlet are different heights. The outlet from the building out into the parking lot is a couple inches higher than the outlet, which is backwards. However, it will still drain. It does create some pressure, but the plumbing contractor, actually it was a water main contractor, did the investigation on this. They scoped every structure, walked all the way out to the detention pond on the northwest side. Everything was clear. They found very little obstruction. A couple pieces of the boardroom hallway, which were old roof tar, about the size of a big golf ball, about 3 of those. They found no other obstruction. The only thing they did find was in the sanitary line across the street, Army Trail on the south side of the property, where the sewer line was backed up, and they contacted the city to have that flushed. So we're pretty confident that the individuals that Stark and Sons that did this work, their opinion was that it was just a deluge, and the city storm sewers they just couldn't handle the pressure. There was nowhere for the water to go. The reason we got water inside the commons is we had removed that plug and we just reinstalled it this week. So we'll no longer get backflow water into the commons. Previously, in a heavy downpour, we would get maybe 5 gallons of water inside the commons right around that clean out. Other than that, nothing. So that's where we are right now.
So the boardroom hallway, that problem was caused by the current construction we have going on. Is that the way I understand it? That it was. Let me
clarify. So when they had trenched the floor to make connections for all the new sinks in the bathrooms in the family consumer science hallway and in the boardroom, they trenched that floor, put new underground drainage in, cut the floor, saw cut it open, ran their pipes. When they connected all that, they mistakenly tied that sanitary line, which would be a sanitary line, into the storm line. So when we had a rain, that storm line had nowhere to go, and the path of least resistance was to blow water out of those. When they reconnected those lines a week ago, 2 weeks ago, into the sanitary line, we have no problem. Sanitary line flows fine.
Can I just add, there were no drawings of the underground piping in that part of the building. So we don't have the design drawings, and there were no as-builts that we were aware of at the time. So the best information that we had was that there was an underground line under the corridor, which was assumed to be sanitary. So the contractor didn't do anything wrong. They tied into the pipe that they were told to tie into. Turns out that it was the wrong pipe. It was a storm pipe, and that the sanitary was 8-9 feet away to the west on the other side of the corridor wall under the lockers. So once we were made aware of that, then we were able to make all the proper tie-ins and get the contractor, or give direction to the contractor to tie in the correct place.
So all of that in that hallway somehow contributed to the problem in the commons?
Well, yes and no. The problem in the commons was we have removed a cap underneath the covering, and with the deluge of rain we had, it just backed up and had nowhere to go. So path of least resistance was there was no cap on that drain, and it came up inside the boardroom. I'm sorry, inside the commons. We have since replaced that and don't expect any more problems other than what you've had in previous years. Like 2004, since the Commons was done, we don't expect any other problems. They scoped that entire line from the Commons going south all the way to a classroom, then it goes to another, out to the hallway where it exits the building on the west side. And the entire line was clear.
When the flood initially happened, the assumption was that they were related. The water in the boardroom wing and the water in the Commons were related events. And after all the investigation that Carrie talked about, we were pretty confident that they are completely unrelated events that just happened to occur simultaneously because of the deluge of the rain. And the piping issue that we just talked about. So, but they are two completely separate plumbing systems that exit, the stormwater exits the building in different places. And we have a drawing here that we've been piecing together all of our investigations. So I can show that to you guys if you want after the meeting.
So basically, if the next time we have a deluge, we're going to just have some basic water issues and somewhere hopefully in the near future. And I know when you got a building as big as this, pieced together as many times with additions and all sorts of other things, it's difficult to do. But we're not talking a bunch of water. You know, at least you're saying a couple gallons here, 5 gallons there. Is that correct, Carrie?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So we're going back to our original plan of what's been in place for 14 years. There's really not had a problem. I mean, you have, like I said, you have a very, very small amount of water coming out of one clean out. But yeah, we thought originally, we were racking our brains. Why now? Why after all this time, boardroom hallway's never been disturbed. And we thought there was a correlation between the two. Well, there wasn't. The only correlation was they piped the new sanitary into the storm. So when we put everything back the way it was, they ran a new line. We recapped, put a pressure cap on the one in the Commons. We should be back to normal. I said and the scope and the investigation actually bears that out.
All right. Can you hear me, guys? Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I'm fine with that. Any other questions, guys, in regards to Watergate 99?
Can I add one other comment? The cammering of the main lines that run stormwater out of the Commons and out the west side of the building, there were multiple dips uncovered in the pipe, meaning the pipes they are holding water. There are places where instead of it being a straight line that slopes and gravity feeds the water to the outside of the building, there are dips that are holding water. So that is slowing the release of water out of the building. So in our severe rain event, all the roof drains are collecting water and funneling it to the underground pipes. That water's not exiting the building as quickly as it could because of these dips in the pipe. So the general consensus is it's not going to cause flooding, but that problem's not going to go away. So meaning my recommendation would be if we're renovating the library, we may consider saw cutting the floor to address that underground piping work at the same time. If we're going to do any flooring replacement in the Commons, we saw cut the floor to replace that underground pipe at the same time. So it's a problem we want to keep an eye on. But in the immediate near term, we're relatively confident that it won't lead to additional flooding.
And that's what I like to hear as far as, once we're here and we're cutting and tearing and ripping, let's do it all now, especially since that boardroom wing, last thing we want to know is that there's a bunch of sewage water flowing through our fabulous new area. Anything different than what, we may bring on our own. Anything else that anyone from the committee wants to bring up?
Nope, I'm good.
All right. With that being said, I will call